Good evening. How are you, my holy sisters and brothers? Great to be with you again. That was Yachad, together. It's all about being together. That song is called Yachad, written by Shlomo Carlebach and performed by the Cantors from the feature film When Do We Eat?, which Nina and I wrote and I directed. And that's a classic and pretty raucous but Torah-drenched comedy about Passover. It's called When Do We Eat? You can learn more about it at whendoweeat.com. But those are the Cantors in the movie. That was Avshalom Katz and Chaim Goldberger and Yehuda Solomon from the Moshav Band performing Yachad. Let's light up the darkness. All right. Here we go. Light it up. Who is with us on this fine Wednesday evening as we're getting ready for Thanksgiving? Quick note, tomorrow's Thanksgiving, and we're going at the regular time. No, I know it's not convenient for everybody, but everyone's on a different schedule. If you can't be with us live, understood. Hopefully you can make it up later. But we will be having class at the regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific, tomorrow, Thursday, Thanksgiving. And speaking of Thanksgiving, here's a brand new shirt, just got it. It's in the AT store. It's shop.accidentaltalmudist.org. Baruch Hashem. That's what we say whenever we hear good news, whenever we're feeling thankful. And as the Talmud teaches, really one should bless God. That's what it means. Bless God. Blessed be God. And we should bless God both for the good in our lives and for the challenging. We should just say Baruch Hashem no matter what happens. But certainly it is the custom to say Baruch Hashem when we're feeling grateful. So, tomorrow's not a Jewish holiday, but it's a day of national Thanksgiving in the United States. And it's a good time. Every day's a good day, but particularly tomorrow is a good day to say Baruch Hashem. And if you like the shirt, we got the wisdom candle right there on the back. So that's available. Nina will put the link in the comments. Shop.accidentaltalmudist.org. Who is with us as we're getting started doing a little learning on the Wednesday night Erev Thanksgiving, as it were? Lila Tov from Lebanon says Sharon Frant Brooks, James from Indianapolis, Melissa from Great Neck, Pam from Nashville, Stephen from New Hampshire, John is in Sedona, Pauline in Arkansas, Donna in Bahama, Tom saying happy Thanksgiving, Haverim. We're going to use that word Haverim in our daf. We're actually not going to cover that paragraph, but Haverim, later it came to mean the sages. It's how the sages referred to each other. It really means friends. But a little earlier in that Talmudic period, in the Mishnaic period, it referred to people who took on themselves the extra stringencies, people that you could be very confident that they would be scrupulous with tithing and other matters that everyone would obey the law, but these guys went the extra distance to be scrupulous, and they were part of that society of Chaverim, the friends, as it were, but as a little bit of an inner circle of people who took on themselves, a higher degree of observing the commandments with a little bit of punctiliousness, as it were. Randy says shalom from Florida and happy Thanksgiving. Peter with us from Vermont. Hannah from Mississippi. Shmuela from Tacoma, Renee from Indianapolis. John says, as my wife says in Spanglish, Japi sanguibin. Japi sanguibin. I'm not sure what that means. I'm sorry. Chaim with us from Charlotte, Lucy from Minnesota, Nancy from North Carolina, Diana from San Diego, Donna loves When Do We Eat? Thank you, Donna. Susan with us from Scottsdale. Donna's got it. That's how we, initialize the title of our movie, WDWE. God, that has appeared in my emails, just tens of thousands of times. And all the time. It's really been a blessing in our lives that we made a movie. We hoped it would be the Jewish It's a Wonderful Life, and that people would watch it every year at Passover. And for a long time, we didn't know if that had happened or not. Our deal wasn't the best. It was an independent film, and we just weren't getting proper reporting. But it did, in fact, become a cult hit. And there's just thousands and thousands and thousands of people who watch it all around the world as Passover approaches in the spring. It's a dysfunctional family comedy on the surface, and beneath the surface, there's just a lot of Kabbalah and Torah and Talmud and just deep teachings beneath the surface. But on top, it's a quite a funny, even raucous, dysfunctional family comedy film. So check it out. When Do We Eat? And thank you for the good word, Donna. And what is Sharon says, my mom is from Mexico, so we had some interesting Spanish, Yiddish, English conversational combos. Love it. Diana says, Baruch Hashem. Diana's calling her friend Peter. Nina's got the link to the AT store. Janice says, or Thanksgiving. Very good. Using the term we've now learned that the evening of the day that's coming up, the sages call it the light. So we're in it right now. We're in the light of Thanksgiving right now. Paul is with us from Chicago. Nina mentioning that her father of blessed memory, who we miss so much, Jaime, his name was Chaim, life. He was Argentinian, and I'm Chilean, so Nina's dad and I used to speak in Spanish all the time. And you know what? Let us mention, because Jaime certainly would have noted, today was the passing of Diego Maradona, the great Argentinian soccer star, taken, from this world at a young age, only 60 years old. I had fond memories. My family, the World Cup is a big deal. We always watch the World Cup. And, Maradona was there in 82. They had some frustration, and then Argentina won it in 86. Some very famous golazos from Maradona. So may his memory always be for a blessing, really taken from the world at too young an age. Rochelle with us from California. Doug from Forest Hills. I got to think Spanish. Diana loves the movie. John. Oh, Thanksgiving. Is that what you're saying? Happy Thanksgiving. Japi sanguivin. Japi. Happy. Now I understand. The J is a jota in Spanish. Happy Thanksgiving. Happy Thanksgiving. I get it. Thanks, John. Okay. Tom says, what is the difference between or and Erev? Now, that definitely is different. That is a common misconception, right? So very often, for example, people will think that Erev Shabbos, means Friday night. No, it's not, right? Erev Rosh Hashanah, Erev Yom Kippur, or Erev Shabbos means the day before, right? So it's actually, on Friday afternoon, we would say to each other, a good Erev Shabbos, because it's not Shabbos yet. And if you're talking about the previous night, then you would be talking, like the or of Erev Shabbos would be Thursday night. Right, so Erev does not mean the night before. Now we have the term, right? You could say either the Lila of, the night of, or you could say or HaShabbos, right? The light of Shabbos would be Friday night. So we're in right now, or HaHodu, right? HaYom Hodu, right? The day of Thanksgiving. The or, as we've learned, like we search for the leavened bread before Passover on the or, the light of the 14th of Nissan. That's the night before So Passover night, let's say if Passover started on a Thursday, right? So the or of Passover would be Wednesday. If Passover started Thursday night, right? Because Friday is the actual day that it starts. So on the Hebrew calendar, right, a date always starts the night before. So if Passover was scheduled to begin on a Friday, so we have our Seder Thursday night, it's already Passover. The 15th of Nissan would begin Thursday night. The or of Passover would be Wednesday night, right? It's the previous night, completely the previous night. Okay, this is taking too long to get through the list. Tom says the hand of God. He's talking about Maradona. Beautiful. Helena with us from Finland. Philip says Pennsylvania's in the house. Welcome, welcome, everybody. Over on the YouTube side, Shira with us from Dallas. Samantha saying shalom from Tacoma. Happy Thanksgiving for everyone to stay safe and COVID-19 free. Amen. Marjorie with us from Virginia and Lindsay in Cincinnati. Welcome, everybody. All right, let's get to work. Where are we holding? We are in the 4th tractate of the Talmud. That's tractate Pesachim, the laws of Passover. We are on Daf Daled, page 4. We're in chapter 1, continuing our discussion of Mishnah number 1. All right, so what this Mishnah was all about, we've already been talking about it, that on the or of the 14th of Nissan, right? So the night of the previous day, right? So fully 24 hours before we would start having our Seder, which is on the night of Passover. So on the or of the 14th, that's when we do the search for leavened bread in our houses, the search for chametz, right? That's the kind of bread that is prohibited to be in our possession during Passover, during the festival of matzahs. So we search for it on the or of the 14th of Nisan. Passover's on the 15th of Nisan. So then the question was, why did the Tana of our Mishnah, the rabbi of our Mishnah, use this term, the or of the 14th, the light of the 14th, which led to all of this arguing about, well, what are we talking about? Are we talking about the night of the 14th or the morning of the 14th? Why did he use this term that could lead to that kind of dispute and discussion? And it was a euphemism, right? So Rebbe wanted to open our discussion of the laws of Passover with nice words, right? Not that evening is somehow bad, but light. I mean, everybody loves light. Light is good, right? God said light is good. God said, let there be light, and he saw that the light was good. So he wanted to be open with a term that is synonymous with good, or that God has deemed to be good. And since already in many places in Talmudic times, they referred to the night before of a date, when the beginning of a date on the calendar, when it's night, since Hebrew dates always begin at night, that in many places they call that the or, the light of that date. So Rebbe opened with that use of the word, knowing that it was a euphemism for night or for evening, and choosing to speak that way because it's a more refined way to speak. And it certainly was clear enough. As we saw, there were so many proofs brought that everyone understood that this was, in fact, the evening of the 14th. So the lesson that we talked all about yesterday, and we're going to complete that part of our discussion today, is that whenever possible, we're going to elevate our speech. We're going to refine our speech, both in terms of our choice of words and our choice of concepts. We want to keep our speech on the positive, on the good, on the refined, and for sure, we're going to avoid all kinds of vulgarity and profanity. And of course, we're not going to sacrifice clarity and truth. I mean, we have to be able to communicate effectively, but wherever there is a way to be more positive, more refined, more elevated, and communicate what we have to communicate, that's the way we want to do it. So we have an incident that Yochanan from Hakuk went out to the villages, right? So he's a city boy, right? A sage from the city. And he went out into the villages, into the farmlands. And when he returned to his, fellow sages, they asked him, so is the wheat harvest coming along nicely? Is the wheat crop coming along nicely? In other words, is this going to be a fertile year and there's not going to be any hunger in the city? Are things good for the country? You know, it's funny, like so many of us, whether we live in the city or in suburbs, or there's very few people involved in farming anymore in the world. It's a very small percentage. It used to be the number one job in America for a long time. Not so much now. But even when people were not, you know, directly, personally involved in farming, you know, for most of the history, the vast majority of the history of humankind, people were tuned in to the crop news, as it were. How is it going for the farms and the farmers? Because that's going to affect everybody. It's only in the very, very modern age that, you know, the fact that there's going to be food to go around for everybody is just a given. You know, we have so much technology, and even, God forbid, there's you know, a lack of rain, we're going to be able to get around it. And, you know, even if there's a terrible famine in one country, I mean, the world is so interconnected that rarely does it, you know, stop raining everywhere in the world. So it's like we just don't worry about that so much. But it's good to realize that most people, most of the history, you know, really wanted to know how is it going on the farms, as it were. So they asked Yochanan, so how's it going out in the farms? Is the wheat crop coming in nicely? And it was not coming in nicely. And he didn't want to be the bearer of bad tidings. He needed to report what was happening, but he wanted to do it in a more refined way. So he said, the barley crop is coming in nicely. Right? So the barley was coming in nicely, but what they want to know about was the wheat. Big difference, because the wheat is what humans eat, and the barley back then is what the animals ate. Right? So he did refine his speech. He didn't say, no, the wheat is going badly. They asked him, is the wheat going nicely? He said, well, the barley's going nicely. And they made fun of him. So it's like, even when people agree that they should refine their speech, okay, so different people are going to disagree on how one should refine his speech. They made fun of him. They said, why don't you go tell the horses and the donkeys that the barley is coming in nicely? And so then the Gemara asks, well, what should he have said? And they give him two choices. He should have said, well, the wheat came in nicely last year. Or he could have said, the lentils are coming in nicely, because lentils are considered human food, just like wheat, as opposed to barley, which was considered animal food. I know we eat barley in many, you know, in the modern world now, but back then it was fodder for animals. So, you know, it's like you can't win, right? This guy knew he should not bring bad news. He should be, you know, a little bit refined about how he said it. He tried to do that, and they still made fun of him. And you know what? He did the right thing. He did fine. He learned a lesson. Okay, he could be even more refined last time. I don't think that what we're learning here is that they really mercilessly bullied him and mocked him so much. They said, you know what? Now that you're refining, you could go even further, right? So I think the lesson for us is that this idea that we're trying to refine our speech, we should never be satisfied, right? We shouldn't say, okay, I've eliminated curses from my vocabulary, I'm good. The truth is that, first of all, language is always shifting. People's sensitivities are always shifting. Who were around and what is important to them. Always difficult. You know, it's not like we're ever going to master the art of refined speech. So it's something that we keep working on. And I think that's the lesson that we get from how his peers told Yochanan of Hakuk that he could do better. Another incident. So Rav, the Amora, who was living in Babylonia, in Babel, went up to Eretz Yisrael, right? So went up to the Holy Land from Babylonia. So that's where the two major Jewish communities were in the Talmudic era. One in Babylonia, the other one in the Holy Land. But the Holy Land was under Roman rule and really under the boot, as it were, of Roman rule. And that's why there was more extensive, organized Torah study possible actually in Babylonia than in the Holy Land. But at any rate, there certainly still was a good community of scholars in the Holy Land. And Rav went up to visit the Holy Land. Back then, of course, a much bigger journey, much more difficult journey than now. But he went. And when he got there, so he, went by his uncle's house, Rav Chia. So Rav Chia is not only Rav's uncle, but this family was sort of complicated because Rav Chia had multiple half siblings, right? So, because what happened was his parents were people who both had previous marriages and children from previous marriages, and then they married. And so Rav Chia was the full child of those two parents, but he had half brothers and half sisters. One of his half brothers was named Aveyu, and one of his half sisters was named Ima. So they were both half siblings to him, but Aveyu and Ima were actually not related to each other at all. I mean, they became step siblings, but they were not related by blood at all, and they ended up marrying each other. Perhaps they were already adults when their parents married. It was not considered a prohibited union in any way, certainly halachically permitted. And so when he's asking Rav about his half siblings, Aveyu and Ima, he's asking Rav about his parents. Right? So his parents are both siblings, half siblings of his uncle Rav Chia. Tragically, they had both died by this point, and Rav Chia was not aware. There was not that good communication from the Holy Land to Bavel. So first he asked Rav, is Aveyu alive? Now, Rav didn't want to say to him, my father has died. So he wanted to find a euphemism, a more sort of elevated way to convey that information than to just say, my father died. So he says, so his uncle says, is Aveyu alive? And his nephew answers him, is Ima alive? And so the uncle says, well, is Ima alive? And Rav answers him, is Aveyu alive? So the two questions were answered with questions. But these are sages and they understand each other very well. So Rav Chia got the message that both of his siblings, his half-sister and half-brother who were married to each other, had both died. He hadn't heard about it, but now he was getting this sort of late news. So now he's been notified that he's lost siblings. And so that's kind of a first degree of mourning. He's a mourner now. But he didn't hear it on the day that it happened or even a few days. He heard it more than 30 days after his siblings had left this world. So he becomes a mourner, but only for one day. So how do we know that? So after he understood that both of his siblings had died, he said to his attendant, remove my shoes and carry my garments to the bathhouse. That was the incident. And the Gemara tells us, the Talmud tells us that from his reaction to the news that his siblings have died, we learn three things. Number one, we learn that a mourner removes his shoes, right? So in the Jewish tradition, when somebody is a mourner, a parent, a child, a sibling, a spouse, they remove their shoes. Number two, if you get the news that you are a mourner more than 30 days after the actual death has happened, so you're not going to sit the Shiva, the full 7-day Shiva that you would otherwise, you're only going to do it for one day. And third, we learn that part of a day counts like a day. So he doesn't have to, sit in a low chair and receive visitors even for the whole day. He's just going to symbolically act as a mourner by removing his shoes, but he's going to go to the bathhouse. Who knows? Maybe he has to give a speech that night. He needed to be clean. But the bottom line is a mourner does not go to the bathhouse. So from the fact that he went that day, we understand that he doesn't even have to observe the full mourning ritual for the complete day. It's enough that he does it, for part of the day, like that morning when he heard. Now, Rav wished to avoid giving bad news, but he was asked by his uncle, are his siblings alive? So certainly when we're asked to deliver the news, we inform. We don't say, I don't want to be the bearer of bad tidings and not answer. Of course you answer, and you answer with the truth. But from that, so we learn from Rav's conduct that we do answer, we do give the news, even though we'd rather not be the bearer of bad tidings. But nonetheless, we can look for a more euphemistic way to say it, so long as the information is going to be clear to the listener. We can't speak in riddles in a way that the one who is listening won't understand. He knew that he was speaking to a fellow sage, and from the way he guarded his tongue, that his uncle would get it. So that's the way we would conduct ourselves in that situation. That concludes our discussion of euphemistic language. Now we return to the discussion of our Mishnah. And so the Mishnah said on the or of the 14th, on the evening, as we've established, of the 14th of Nissan, Passover begins on the 15th of the Hebrew month of Nissan. On the evening of the 14th of Nissan, we search our homes for chametz, for leavened bread, by candlelight. Okay, so now the Gemara comments on that Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda have a little bit of a disagreement of what is the deadline for removing the chametz from our possession. The Mishnah doesn't actually teach that we remove the chametz from our house on the evening of the 14th. It says we search for it. So the deadline for getting it out of our possession is actually around midday on the 14th of Nissan. Because you can eat leavened bread the next morning. It's from about noon on that you can no longer eat it. So it's the night before. What you're really doing is searching out everywhere in the house to make sure you haven't missed any. But, whatever bread you're going to eat for breakfast on the 14th, that's okay. You can have that in your kitchen. You only have to get rid of it at about midday on the 14th. So now the Gemara asks, well, since we don't have to get rid of it until midday on the 14th, why are we searching for it on the night before? Why? Maybe why don't we just search for it in the morning? And so one answer that's suggested is, well, we want to, get to it as soon as the day, the Torah says we remove it on the 14th. So the 14th is the time to remove it. So perhaps what we want to do is be vigilant, be pious, go that extra distance to really be on it. And from the moment that the 14th of Nissan comes in, that we want to be involved in the search for and then removal of the bread. So maybe we don't remove it from our house, but we want to get involved in the search right away from the first time that it's called for, which is when the 14th begins on that night, the night before. And how do we know that the vigilant, will try to perform a mitzvah, try to fulfill an obligation at the earliest possible hour? So we see that when there's a Jewish baby boy is going to be circumcised on the 8th day of its life. So it's appropriate, it's possible to do that circumcision at any time during the day, but circumcisions are always scheduled, or whenever possible, they're scheduled in the morning, so that we get a jump on it. So it's a beautiful mitzvah that we're fulfilling, and we want to do it at the earliest time of the day. We also learned that from Avraham, from our patriarch Abraham. And when he was tasked with the greatest challenge of his life, when God tested Abraham and told him to take his son Isaac up onto a mountain that God would show him, and there bring him up as an elevation offering to the Lord. So Abraham did not hesitate, right? He passed the test. He was ready to do whatever God asked because he trusted God. He didn't know what the outcome of this journey would be, but he knew that God is good. And so whatever God was asking him to do would somehow come out well, and he trusted God. And so even though he loved Isaac like any father loves his son with all his heart, when asked to bring him up as an offering on the mountain, Abraham, it says in the Torah, arose early in the morning. Think how often when we don't have something, that's so pleasant to do, we find ourselves lingering in bed a little longer. But Abraham, when told by God to do something, when fulfilling an obligation, that's incumbent on him because God told him to do it. So he gets up at the earliest possible hour to do it. And so perhaps from these two examples, the early circumcision and Abraham getting up early, we learn we're not talking about evening versus morning here, but what we're talking about is at the first opportunity to fulfill a mitzvah. So we're told to search for and remove chametz on the 14th. So as soon as it becomes the 14th, that's why we do it on the evening of the 14th. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says it's not exactly that. The reason that we do it on the evening of the 14th is that because that's when people are at home. People are at home on the 14th in the evening, right? People are at home in the evening. During the day, they work, right? Some people they desist from work on the 14th, but other people do work. Or, they're going to be so involved in the preparations for Passover. But the night before, they're home, so that's a good time to be searching the home for chametz, for leavened bread. And also, since we're told to do this by candlelight, better you should do it in the evening. Now, one could say, I have shutters in my house. I can close the windows. I can make it dark in my house. And then I can use the candle to search for chametz. It doesn't have to be nighttime for that. But still, nighttime is better for a search by candlelight than day would be. So Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak says a very, very practical reason why the sages said that we should do this on the evening of the 14th. That's when people are home, and evening is a better time to search by candlelight, which is the way that we're supposed to do it. And then the Jerusalem Talmud, the Yerushalmi, adds one more reason. At Exodus chapter 12, verse 17, with referring to the Exodus from Egypt, it says, "And you shall observe this day." Here, day doesn't mean daylight. It means the full date on the calendar. And the Yerushalmi says, and from this we learn that the whole day, the whole date on the calendar, the 14th of Nissan, from when it comes in, the evening before, and all through the day, this is a time to be devoted to searching for and removing chametz from our possession. So we don't want to, leave out the evening before from observing this commandment of removing chametz from our possession. It's a positive commandment in the Torah to remove it. So we want to, do the part of that commandment at night, searching for it, and then we're going to actually remove it the next day. But at least we're using both parts of that date, the night before and the day of, is part of that process, searching out the chametz and removing it. And Abaye teaches, based on this, that even a Torah scholar should not begin his Torah study on the evening of the 14th until he has conducted the search for chametz in his home. Now, we're going to get we're not going to talk about it so much tonight. We're going to come to it later in our journey. But spiritually speaking, chametz does represent, arrogance, our puffed up image of ourselves, our sense of entitlement, that puffed up bread, leavened bread, yeast risen bread, as it were. And part of the reason that we remove it is because we want to be in a state of utter humility as we recall how the Holy One rescued us from slavery in Egypt, right? So we want to really get into that state. We want to remove all that chametz. It's a very important part of this whole festival, the search for and removal. So even though Torah study is understood to be, the highest form of serving God, we should not engage in Torah study on the evening of the 14th until we fulfilled our obligation to search for the chametz in our homes by candlelight. And that's even if you're a Torah scholar, and even if you're a Torah scholar who regularly studies at that time. We should have in our lives regular times of Torah study. We should have scheduled regular times of Torah study in our lives. We're told to do that. And we're actually told that when we leave this world and we come to the next world, we'll be asked, were you honest in business when no one was looking? And did you establish regular times of Torah study? But even if your regular time of Torah study is when when evening starts on the 14th of Nissan, you delay your Torah study and do the search for chametz first. So let's see where we are at the end of March. Well, no, we won't be. Yes, obviously we won't be in Tractate Pesachim on the 14th of Nissan. We'll have finished with God's help. At least we're scheduled to have finished our journey through this tractate, and we'll be in the next tractate, which I think is Shekalim, the 5th tractate of the Talmud. So if 6 p.m. at that time of year, is like right as evening is starting, so we're going to have to delay this class that night so that we can do our search for chametz and then have class, right? It's just like that is what we're learning here tonight. I'm not sure how the calendar and the clock are going to work out at that time, but that's what we've just heard here on today's page. Finally, they asked Rav I'm getting close to the end, so please, if you have questions and comments, get them in there. Nina will pass them to me. They asked Rav Nachman Bar Yitzchak, if one rents a house on the 14th of Nisan, on whom is it incumbent to search for chametz? The owner of the house or the one who rents the house? So the simple answer, after a little bit of discussion here in our daf, is, well, it depends when the keys change hands, right? So if the one who's renting the house receives the keys to the house that he's renting before the 14th of Nisan has started, right? So he's already got possession of the house before the 14th. Then when the 14th comes in, so it's his obligation, the one who rented the house. On the other hand, if the one who's renting the house doesn't receive the keys until after the 14th has begun, then it's the obligation of the owner of the house to do the search for chametz, because it's whoever possesses the house at the time that the 14th begins, right? So at twilight on the 14th, when evening begins, whoever owns and has possession of the house, not who owns, but who has possession of the house, is the one who is obligated to search out all the chametz, the leavened bread, in that house. And finally, if one rents it on the 14th itself, so he's taking possession after the 14th has started, can he presume that the house has been searched? It's the obligation of the owner to search out the house. Can he presume that one who is giving him possession of the house on the 14th has in fact done the search? Yes, he can make that presumption. Because the owner would not give. Maybe he doesn't get the keys from the owner. Maybe it's like an Airbnb, right? And he arrives that day on the 14th. It's permitted to travel on the 14th, and then he gets the keys from the lockbox, and the 14th has already begun. Can he presume that the owner searched it? And the answer is yes. He can make that presumption. What if he has reason to presume otherwise? Because maybe he heard from the owner that they were supposed to meet in person, and then he gets a message, the owner can't meet you in person, but don't worry, the keys are in the box. So now he was gonna ask, but it turns out that the owner's out of the country. Now he's not sure if he can presume, but then somebody who was there, and this is 2,000 years ago, and this person is either a woman or a minor or a slave, and these are 3 categories of people that 2,000 years ago were not qualified to be witnesses in a court of law. But if one of them says, no, don't worry, the house has been searched, we believe them, right? So even though they're not, for just as ancient laws, we're not qualified to give testimony before a court of law, they are qualified to say the house has been searched, and we believe them. Why are we going to accept that where we would not accept that in a Beis Din, in a court of law? Because there they would be testifying, and that those are on matters of Torah laws. Here, this is really only with respect to the rabbinic decree that search has to be done the evening before. So the rabbis were able to be a little bit more lenient. And this is the last thing we'll cover today. When you remove the chametz from your dwelling, and even one who rents and says, okay, he can validly assume that all the chametz, all the leavened bread has been removed from that house, still he should, in his heart, nullify any chametz which may have been missed. So not just a renter does that, but we do that in our own homes. Just in case, we do a search, we do a careful search by candlelight, but it's very possible that there's a few crumbs of bread somewhere around the house that we missed. We didn't do it on purpose, we just missed it. And so when we do that ceremony of removing the chametz from our homes, once we complete it, just in case we miss some, we would recite all leaven, or anything leavened which is in my possession, which I have neither seen nor removed, and about which I am unaware, shall be considered naught and ownerless as the dust of the earth. So that is how we are mebatel whatever chametz may have been missed. In other words, we nullify it. We say, I don't own it. It's as if it doesn't exist. And that recital sort of, frees us from worrying that we might have missed some. And so we're, violating the commandment that we shall have no leavened bread, no leavening in our possession during the festival of matzahs. Just in case we miss some, that recital covers us for whatever we may have missed. All right, let's check comments and questions. We've got a few comments. John says, the Rebbe of blessed memory would describe a hospital as a place of healing rather than a place for the sick. Oh, that's beautiful teaching, John. John is a doctor in Sedona, in Arizona. So what a beautiful little teaching about using language in a more elevated way, right? Instead of calling it a house of the sick, better to call it a house of healing, right? A hospital is a house of healing. Beautiful. Thank you, John. And John also says this advice is very important for healthcare personnel when communicating with patients. You look well can really help someone get better. Thank you, John. Dr. Shore, for sharing that with us. Diana, Ruth Davidson Lerner, says, do you use your AT candle for the search? You know what? We only started this, I started teaching this class January 5th of this year. I get, did we already have the candle in place at Passover of this past year? Everything is so weird. My sense of time with COVID and everything. I remember that it was a really, strange but ultimately uplifting Passover. We didn't have, a house full of guests and big seders like we usually make. It was just Nina and I and the kids. We had some special songs, and it ended up is beautiful. It ended up a really, really meaningful Passover. I remember we did the search by candlelight. We did not use this candlestick. I'm just wondering if we even had it at that time. We might not have had it yet. The candlestick came a little bit later. But I like your suggestion, Diana, since this candlestick, represents that at AT Daily we light up the darkness. I think it'll be great to use this candlestick and that candle for the search for chametz on the 14th. Great idea. And Diana also says, speaking of soccer, I just learned that a tie is teku in Hebrew. Oh, I didn't know that. That's so cool. So teku is a sometimes when the rabbis of the Talmud, the sages, debate a certain point and they reach, they don't resolve it. For whatever reason, they can't resolve the debate, and then they just end the conversation by saying teku, let it stand. And I guess in modern Hebrew, that term has come to mean a tie in a sports game. Fascinating. I didn't know that. Carolyn says, does one journal to point their own arrogance? How to remove non-tangible emotion? I'm sorry, I'm not sure what you're asking me. But definitely this idea of removing the chametz from our life, from our homes, right, as we prepare for Passover. It's this idea of we don't want to have any leavened bread in our possession because we're trying to eradicate that arrogance from our lives. And part of that process, right, is that when we go around the house, it's not just looking for the breadcrumbs. What we should be asking ourselves is, in what way did I act arrogantly in this room in the past year? Right? That's a question to ask ourselves during that search for chametz. Right? As we walk through each room of our homes, what happened in this room over the last year where I did not act properly, where I was full of myself, where I was puffed up, where I was arrogant, right? That's that inner meaning of getting the crumbs out. We're not only searching for the physical crumbs, we are searching for the spiritual residue of that kind of arrogant behavior that occurred in that location. And we also have a custom that, if, for example, one was working with one's own arrogance and saying, you know what, I don't like the way I behave when I act arrogantly. And I've been telling myself that before, and I still act that way. So, we'll share this again as we get closer to Passover. I've taught it before, but this idea that behaviors that we are enslaved to, behaviors that we know are wrong, but we do them anyway. So that's our Pharaoh, right? We're enslaved to that behavior. So we've had a tradition in our home for many years that people should think about that before the Passover Seder and ask themselves, what is my Pharaoh, right? So when you identify, you don't tell other people what your Pharaoh is, but you know for yourself, and you write it down. And then before Passover begins, when the guests gather it's still on the 14th, right? Before the Seder has begun, before it's night of the 15th, we'll take those slips of paper and burn them. And say to ourselves, tonight, as we read the Haggadah, as we read the story of God redeeming us from Egypt, and we read the word Pharaoh many times, I'm going to think of this Pharaoh that enslaves me, and I know that God will give me, if I ask God for help, He will give me the energy and the power and the strength to free myself from that behavior that has enslaved me. And then the Seder can become much more personally meaningful, personally transformative. Lucy says, is the removal of the chametz from one's house a Torah commandment or something that came later? No, it's a Torah commandment, right? So we have it, like what time we're going to remove it, how we're going to remove it, all the different mechanisms for removing it and making sure it's not in our possession. Those are all rabbinic decrees. But the fact that we are not allowed to possess any chametz is from Exodus 12:19. 7 days there shall be no chametz, no leaven found in your houses. For whoever eats that which is leavened, that soul shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is a stranger or born in the land. So yes, that is a Torah obligation to remove it. Sharon says, we actually place crumbs in the house with the intention of finding it. We don't look for what is actually left behind. People have different ways of dealing with that. Usually what will happen is we'll do a very thorough cleaning, the day before to make sure that we've removed any stray crumbs that might be around. So since we're probably not going to actually find crumbs on the ground when we go looking for them because we've done a really good cleaning, we want to make sure that we do find some crumbs so that we can fulfill this obligation. What people will do is they'll take some breadcrumbs, wrap them very well so crumbs don't fall out of these little packages. They have like little, aluminum foil balls with some bread inside, and we'll stash a few of them in different rooms. Like often, the mom or the dad will do that, and then the kids will help find the little aluminum balls so that we find crumbs by candlelight, and we know, okay, we put out 10 of them, and now we've collected the 10, and that way we can fulfill the obligation without risking adding to the crumbs that might have been left behind in the house. Oh, nice. Sharon says, a great teacher that I know points out that flour and water, right, the main ingredients of bread, also are ingredients that make paste, right? You can make glue out of flour and water. And likewise, chametz sticks to us unless we really go through this, real process to get rid of it. Pam says, as a social worker, I focus on positive words and strengths when speaking with my clients. I find my clients are able to focus more on solutions than on problems. Beautiful, beautiful, right? So when we really focus on framing things in a positive way, it enrolls everybody in the solution rather than playing a blame game or getting down and downcast about how overwhelming the problems can be. Now we're all getting enrolled in finding, crafting, and moving toward enacting the solutions. And all of that flows naturally from an emphasis on the positive in our word choices and concept choices as we're trying to communicate. And finally, Janice says, giving thanks today and every day, Sal and Nina, for this great class. And thank you, Janice, and everybody, right? I could teach, but if their students aren't here, there's no class, right? So thank you for being here and for being part of this community. And may you all be blessed to grow in wisdom daily. All the best.